I'd like to start by welcoming everybody to our Fireside chat on identity theft and tax administration. My name is Angela Siener. I'm a supervising attorney at Prairie State Legal Services in Illinois, and I'll be your moderator for this presentation. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions, but we have a ton of information to cover today, and we will try to save time at the end for questions, but just in case, feel free to email us after the presentation. Our emails will be at the end of the presentation, and it will be emailed to you when we're finished today. Today, I am joined by three very knowledgeable practitioners. First, we have Evan Phoenix. He's the director of the Federal Tax Clinic at the Public Law Center. He represents low-income taxpayers and tax controversies from examination through federal litigation before the U.S. Tax Court and works to promote fairness and access to justice in the tax system. Evan previously served as the ABA Tax Section Christine A. Brunswick Public Service Fellow and currently chairs the ABA Tax Section's Diversity Committee. Next, we have Heather Carnevale. She is a staff attorney at the Legal Services of Greater Miami, LATC, in Miami, Florida. This is located in the fraud capital of the U.S. Her clinic deals with a high volume of low-income taxpayers affected by identity theft issues because of that. Lastly, we have Leslie McClean. She is the director of the DNA People's Legal Services Low-Income Taxpayer Clinic. DNA serves all of Coconino County and those portions of Navajo, Apache, and Rio Arriba counties, which include the Navajo, Hopi, and Jicarilla Apache nations. 7 tribal nations lie within this service area, and Leslie was the 2023 to 2025 ABA Tax Analyst Fellow. She's a graduate of Rowan University and the Sandra Day O'Connor School of Law Indian Law Program. Today, we are going to walk through several different areas of identity theft. First, we'll be discussing tax-related versus non-tax-related identity theft and work-related identity theft. We'll then pivot over to recent developments, including the difference between identity theft and preparer misconduct. And we will be touching on the post-pandemic fraud landscape generally. And finally, we will be discussing what you can do to help your clients by reviewing the identity theft procedures, resources for you and your clients, and finally, our contact information in case you have any questions that we're unable to cover today. And now I will turn it over to Evan to get us started.
Thank you, Angela. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you all for joining us. So we'll start with defining what identity theft is. And generally, identity theft occurs when someone, I think you moved the slide, but okay. When someone misuses an individual's personal identifiable information, such as a social security number, an ITIN, name, or a combination of those to commit fraud or other crimes. During the course of this presentation, due to varying degrees of culpability, I will be referring to the victim of identity theft as the true owner of the social security number and the person who perpetrated the misuse as the non-owner or fraudster. If you're interested in learning more about the varying degrees of culpability, the Supreme Court case Flores-Figueroa does discuss what is required in order to hold a person liable for aggravated identity theft. Next slide, please. So an important distinction is what is tax or identity theft in tax administration versus what is identity theft in non-tax administration. So tax-related identity theft is where there is a direct effect on the taxpayer's filing and payment requirements, such as their ability to file a tax return, receive a refund, or take other actions associated with their rights and responsibilities as taxpayers. Non-tax related theft is where the taxpayers credit or finances are directly affected, but there is no direct effect on the tax administration at that time. And it's important to note that although it is primarily a social security number that can be misused, ITINs are also subject to or vulnerable to being misused and having non-owners misuse them to perpetrate identity theft in tax administration. Thank you. Three primary effects of tax-related identity theft are employment or income-related identity theft, refund-related identity theft, and business-related identity theft. It's important to note that these can present alone or in combination, and we'll get more into that during when we're discussing some of the examples. But the other important item to note here is that the scope of this presentation will focus on the first two, employment-related identity theft and refund-related identity theft, not business-related identity theft. Next slide, please. Okay. So business-related identity theft is defined as creating, using, or attempting to use a business's identifying information without authority to obtain tax benefits. And refund-related identity theft occurs when the identity thief uses the victim's social security number or taxpayer identification number to file a false federal income tax return to obtain a refund. If the thief or the non-owner files before the victim may not receive his or her refund. Next slide, please. So employment-related identity theft occurs when a taxpayer's or a dependent's personal information has been misused to maintain employment. So this brings up a really important approach known as the Social Security number ITIN mismatch approach. The Internal Revenue Service or the service recommends that a person who is misusing the Social Security number or taxpayer identification number of another taxpayer report to the IRS that they are using the social of another person, but that they are reporting the income with their ITIN. And so the way you're supposed to do this is when your preparer inputs information from the W-2, if you're a W-2 wage employee, there's to remove the Social Security number that is auto-populated onto your Form 1040 individual taxpayer tax return and make sure that they replace it with your ITIN. The IRS will know that this is a mismatch approach by seeing the Social Security number listed on the W-2 and seeing the ITIN listed on the individual 1040 tax return, and they will know to attribute all of the income to the ITIN. So this can help prevent legal issues for the true owner of the Social Security number and also for the non-owner. So this is where the taxpayer, the non-owner, can perpetrate employment-related identity theft, but not refund-related identity theft. It can cross over to a combination if you were to misuse someone else's information to gain employment and then also report that income and get a refund. Okay, next slide, please.
Hi. So as we are kind of defining different types of identity theft, we wanted to also differentiate what isn't identity theft, but can be a little difficult to determine when a taxpayer first comes into your office. So one of the issues is with a fraudulent return. Is it identity theft or return preparer misconduct? So as we talked about, identity theft is unauthorized use of identity information in a tax context, usually to file a return or to gain employment. Return preparer misconduct occurs when a taxpayer goes to a preparer to have their return prepared. They sign it, and then after the signing, the preparer changes the return without the knowledge or consent of the taxpayer. The purpose of this, from the return preparer's perspective, is sometimes to reroute the refund to their own bank account, Frequently, they add false items to create a larger refund. And then usually there's a combination where they add false items, create a larger refund, divert the falsely created additional refund to their own bank account, and then let the original expected refund go to the taxpayer's account. So they're kind of unawares until they get audited. Now, this can be a distinction that's difficult when a taxpayer first comes into your office. And I like to relate one of my very first tax cases where a low-income taxpayer came into my office. His neighbor had offered to help him, and this is a direct quote, file COVID checks, which to my ears sounds like, oh, you knew you were having your return filed, but he didn't understand. He didn't know exactly what was happening. So the taxpayer received a refund check, thinking it was a COVID check. And then they received a notice from the IRS trying to collect a $24,000 tax debt. And that's when they came to us. So being new to tax, I wasn't quite certain if it was identity theft or return preparer misconduct. So I went ahead and followed the procedures for both, which we'll get into later. And the IRS went ahead and made the determination for me. And they found identity theft, not return preparer misconduct, because the taxpayer did not understand what was being filed. He provided all the information required for a tax return. Tax returns were filed fraudulently. I won't get into the details of how they did it, but because of the taxpayer's understanding of the situation, it was treated as identity theft. And I think we're ready for the next slide. Just to drive home the differences, we'll go in detail for the procedures to resolve identity theft, but for return preparer misconduct, there's two main forms. Well, two forms. There's the 14157, which is your basic return preparer complaint, return preparer misconduct complaint. And this is for really general issues, like issues with fees, not providing copies of documents. It doesn't ask the IRS to make any changes to the taxpayer's account. The other form that you usually need to file if it's a bad enough situation that it's gotten to your office is the 14157A. So this is an affidavit. Along with this form, you need to file a signed return as the taxpayer intended to file it. And this reports the situations we've been talking about, where a return was filed without consent, or it was altered after signing, or the return preparer diverted, all or part of the refund. It's a very high factual burden to kind of get a finding of this. But if the IRS does find return preparer misconduct, then they'll remove any false returns. They won't hold the taxpayer liable for fraudulent refunds that were paid out. And they will reissue a diverted refund. Okay, I think we're on to the next.
Thanks. This is me. Right. So we're going to talk about identity theft when your social security number is used to work. So this is basically the scenario is someone has obtained your social security information and enough personal information about you to probably create false identification so that they can present this when they're asked for identification for working purposes. And the employer will then, of course, send W-2 information or 1099 information to Social Security and the IRS. And as a result, you might get, so this doesn't necessarily mean that the person using your ID has filed a tax return. In this scenario, a lot of times they don't file a tax return. They're just using the information to allow them to get a job and to work. So then you file your tax return and the IRS sends you an underreporter notice saying you failed to report this other income. And that would have been the income that was earned by the person who fraudulently used your social security number to gain employment. That's how these cases present to us most often. Sometimes, for example, if the fraudulent worker, the person who used your information fraudulently does file a tax return, then your tax return will get rejected when you try to file. You could also find this out. So maybe you're not working. This happens a lot of time to older taxpayers who maybe haven't worked for a while, haven't filed a tax return. But perhaps you're getting Social Security disability, and you get a notice from Social Security saying because of your wages that you earned last year, that your income, your disability income is going to be increased this year. That's a sign that someone is using your information. And another thing to do in this case, and usually it would have to be before you alert the IRS of identity fraud, identity theft, is you could obtain IRS wage and income statements for the taxpayer and determine what's in there. That's what we do a lot. That's how we can then determine that someone has used someone's Social Security number to work. Next slide. And so how do you resolve this? Once you notice that, there's these earnings that are not me, I didn't work for this company, what are some options for resolving it? You can file a police report, and that it's not always helpful, but often we've been asked if the person has filed a police report about the identity theft. So that's a good thing to be able to do if the police department will take the report. You can file an identity theft affidavit, Form 14039. That's what we do in most of these cases. If the taxpayer did have income for that year, they should file a return, a paper return, and include the ID theft affidavit with it. You can file a report with the Federal Trade Commission, and that's available at identitytheft.gov. And that will that does file a Form 14039 as well. So once you do that, you don't necessarily have to file the paper Form 14039. But if we are filing a paper tax return, we always do include the ID theft affidavit, Form 14039 with it. I don't think there's any penalty in doing both of those. You should report we tell our clients to report to Social Security, ask to have the fraudulent income removed. That's in SSA 795, and check Social Security earnings. And there is a $100 fee. Evan might want to talk a little bit more about that. That is incurred if you need to get a detailed Social Security earnings report showing who the employers were. Is that right, Evan?
Yes. If you there is no low income certification fee waiver, there's also no exception currently for victims of fraud. If you require the employment records, employment history, there's a $100 fee.
Okay. And we talked about, if you're able to, if you haven't yet filed the identity theft affidavit and alerted the IRS of possible identity theft, and you can still pull wage and income transcripts, and those do list on there the name and the EIN of the employer reporting the income. So that might be helpful to avoid the $100 fee. Next slide. Okay, so another scenario, a little different than, much different than the one where someone has actually used your Social Security number and created fake ID to get employment, is if someone's using your Social Security number to create a W-2 or a 1099. And how this happens is it's just fraudulent document creation. And for, better or worse, the advance of technology now, allows with the taxware software for you to pretty much create any tax documents you want in there, right? And so someone can put in W-2 information into a tax return, even if a W-2 doesn't exist. And that's what happens with with a lot of these. Whether or not some of them get transmitted to the IRS and Social Security, but not always. So we've seen scenarios where, someone created a false tax return and used false W-2 information, but it didn't, but it was not transmitted to the IRS or Social Security by the employer or by the person who created these false documents. And so what happens is when this person tries to file the return using these fraudulent documents, the IRS will often send a notice to the taxpayer, and that notice is CPO 5 saying we're holding your return because we need to validate the withholding on your return. And then perhaps next they'll get a 105C letter saying we're disallowing your claim for withholding. And so that tells you that whoever used this and created this W-2 did not report it so that it's showing up on the IRS transcripts. So it's not showing up in the IRS transcripts. Someone's just trying to push through a return and get a refund with high withholdings, or usually very high withholdings. Interestingly enough, we have at least one case right now where the IRS said, we're disallowing your claim for withholding, but we're still going to consider the income on that fraudulent return. The IRS doesn't know it's fraudulent yet. We're still going to take that income that you claimed, and we're going to compute tax on it and try and collect it. So, they're disregarding the federal withholding that was reported on the W-2, but they're holding the taxpayer accountable for the income and wanting to collect tax on it. So that, gets worked out the same way. You file, an ID theft affidavit, but it's a little different of a situation. And again, if you haven't filed, if the IRS is not alert of a possible ID theft, you can pull wage and income statements to see whether or not the person had actually transmitted the W-2 and 1099 to the IRS. Next slide. How do you resolve it? The resolutions are pretty similar. You file an ID theft affidavit, Form 14039, you file a criminal complaint. If the taxpayer had income, you file a paper return with their actual real income, and you include an ID theft affidavit. Again, report to Social Security and ask them to remove the fraudulent income and check the Social Security earnings report. Another thing that we've done recently is if we can, go into the wage and earning statements and get the employer's information from there, the alleged employer, we have written to those companies and ask them to file a corrected W-2 or a corrected 1099-C with zero income. And in 2 cases, we've heard from the companies that we've written to, and they've said they didn't issue the original W-2 or 1099. So they obviously can't correct it. And in one situation, it sounds like there was business ID fraud because the company, the executive director I talked to at the company said that it had been ongoing and they were having a hard time resolving it. Someone had gotten their EIN information and used it to issue false W-2s and 1099s. Next slide. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, I'd like to also just note in regards to filing the police report, they may push back, not understanding why. So it's important for you to explain to your clients what to say. They can explain that they're working with an LITC attorney or just a representative in general, and that this is required documentation for them to submit the identity theft affidavit to the Internal Revenue Service to unwind the identity theft. And when they've clarified the purpose and the police station understands, they're usually more amenable to filing the report. So I think just communicating the reasoning and how important it is to help support the claim helps them understand, and then they're more likely to say yes. If they just go in there saying they want to file a police report because they think somebody did something, they're usually dismissive and not helpful. But after they understand what the purpose is and what's going on, they're more likely to help the taxpayer just prepare the police report.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. It would be helpful. Maybe we can, offline or something, talk about maybe some kind of a list that we can put together for clients to take with them when they're doing this. Because I know it's hard and it's intimidating. And when our clients are told, no, we can't do that for you, they generally just back down and come and tell us. They said, no, they can't do that for us.
Yeah. The other thing that's really important is like what we usually do is after you complete the FTC report for identity theft, we give them a copy of that to take with them to the police station and let them know that it's one of the required steps to get the fraud alerts on their credit reports. So helping the local police department understand that they need a copy of the police report to show that they're entitled to credit monitoring or fraud alerts on their credit report for a year or up to 7 years for free, that helps them protect themselves from future misuse or identity theft. It helps them understand more the importance of it. So even just providing them a copy of the FTC report and the printout of the screen that says what you need to do and the little checklist there is also very helpful. But I'd be more than happy to talk with you off screen to maybe put together a little packet.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Okay, we're going to move on to what might be for our clinic anyway. It's sort of a new trend that we're seeing in identity theft, and that's when identity theft, when Social Security numbers are used to enroll in the marketplace health insurance, the Affordable Care Act. Unknowingly, someone will perhaps, talk to you about signing up for some extra health insurance. It varies. Sometimes people just use your Social Security and other personal information, and they create some some income amount that they know will make you eligible for the ACA credits. And so usually this is done by some type of a health insurance broker or agent. Someone has the ability to sign folks up for this, and the incentive for them, of course, is they get a commission from it. So that's where the scam comes to be played out. So someone signs you up, you don't really know. Our clients often have never gotten any kind of health insurance ID cards or any information saying that they actually have this health insurance. But how they find out is their tax return will be rejected if they try to e-file without 1095 information. So if you have gotten health insurance through the Affordable Care Act and you've gotten credits applied to that premium, or to credits to pay for your premium in full, then you should receive a 1095-A. Often our clients don't get the 1095-A. They try and file their tax return. It's rejected. There is a note on the software does tell you why it's rejected, because you didn't file your 1095-A information. Of course, if they don't have it, they can't do it. In those situations, again, we resort to a paper return with an ID theft affidavit stating that they didn't sign up for this, and providing as much information as we can to show the reasons why this wasn't this was ID theft. They hadn't signed up for it. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a little, when we talk about ID theft, right? This is a little bit of a gray area, because our clients often will say, oh yeah, I remember someone calling me and asking me for this information and saying I might be able to get, free health care or other health care. I think we haven't seen it in our service area so much, but we are now starting to see it because many of our clients qualify for Indian healthcare service. So it would be unlikely that they would think that they have to, sign up for any other kind of healthcare insurance. But, but they have been. They've been approached by folks, maybe someone they know down at the chapter house, or just someone they know who signs people up for health insurance, and they've given them this information. So I do think that, though, the information, I do think it falls into the definition for identity theft, because I think that the information is, unknowingly being used for a fraudulent purpose. I don't think that it's being given to this person so that they can sign them up for insurance that they don't need. The other situation is you get a 1095 for A, right? And you don't know what it's for, and you send it, you do get a copy of the 1095A, and you give it to your tax preparer with all the other information, and they prepare your tax return, and lo and behold, you didn't qualify for any of these credits that were used to, to get you this health insurance. And so on your tax return, you will be that those credits that you were given but that you didn't qualify for will be shown as money you now owe back to the IRS. And so we had, so for example, someone might have otherwise not owed anything to the IRS, but now all of a sudden they have like a $5,000 bill to the IRS for this 1095. So what we end up doing then is, because they did file a tax return with the 1095A information on it, we then amend the return and file that with Form 14039, taking the 1095 information off. And so other things, we asked people, did you receive health insurance cards? And if they didn't, we put that in with the ID theft affidavit. For cases where clearly people have either Medicare or, like I said, in our service area, Indian healthcare services, we put that in the ID theft affidavit. And, hopefully that will get the ID theft proven and get that removed from the taxpayer's tax return. Heather?
To add to the information you can provide on that identity theft report, if you call the marketplace, you can get the name of the agent of record that enrolled the taxpayer, and they'll give you the NPIN, which is the number of that agent. That might be a good thing to include in the affidavit. So if the IRS does find identity theft, one of the things that they will do, in addition to an identity theft stop on the account, is issue an identity protection PIN. So we wanted to talk about that a little bit. So the IP PIN is a 6-digit number. The IRS assigns a new one every year to the taxpayer. They issue a letter, and then the taxpayer needs to include that number to e-file their return. You can still paper file without the IP PIN, but there are delays. It can also be looked up on the individual online account for taxpayers that have access and tech savvy on that, which is not terribly common. If the IRS finds identity theft as a result of resolving any of the previously discussed issues, they will automatically issue an IP PIN every year, which sounds like a great idea. But there's no opt-out, which is different from if the taxpayer elected it on their own. If the taxpayer is just trying to be proactive, they sign up for IP PIN, they find that it's a pain, they can opt out. But if they've been a victim of identity theft, then it's a lifetime thing. They have an IP PIN every year. This can create a lot of barriers for taxpayers who have frequent address changes, especially. And then if you add that onto a lack of tech savvy or tech access, then you end up with a situation where you have a taxpayer who's been issued an IP PIN. they never got the letter, or sometimes they lost the letter. And then they're trying to file a tax return and they don't know the IP PIN. They can't go to an online account because they don't have a smartphone, or don't know how to work it. And so the thing they need to do is call the IRS to request that they reissue the IP PIN letter. You need to make sure that the IRS has a good address on file. And then that can take 2 to 3 weeks, I think about 21 days for the letter to be received by the taxpayer. So there's some delays. And there's always the option to file without the IP PIN paper, but that I've been told by reps takes longer. On to recent developments, I think.
Hello. So post the pandemic, there has been an increase in fraud during the 7 to 8 years leading up to the pandemic, due to the Internal Revenue Service's efforts to combat fraud. The numbers were decreasing. Since then, we've seen an increase in a spike, especially a targeted, more of a focus on targeting tax professionals. I was during our preparation for this presentation, I was explaining some of the difficulties I've had sometimes with authenticating myself, and the higher level of scrutiny that I'm having to go through. And once I'm done, some of the agents have told me, like, okay, now that we know you are who you are, the reason for this is that there has been an increase in fraudsters calling us and pretending to be professionals and trying to use us to gain taxpayer information for fraud purposes. So it is very important to keep in mind. There's also been pop-ups, like about 30 to 45 minutes that the service has started to do just outreach and education on the increase in fraud and stressing the importance of understanding not just what you can do to protect yourself, but also the legal requirements that you have to report, and making sure that everybody within your organization understands those requirements to report and how to do so ASAP, to help mitigate any harm to the clients. And so if you guys haven't had a chance to attend one of those, the last one was last month. They will be starting again next year. I would highly encourage all of you to attend one of them. They're short. They give really great concrete strategies and advice on how to protect yourself. I found it very enlightening, and we'll be making it mandatory training for all LITC staff in my organization moving forward. In terms of vulnerable populations, those who are especially targeted include the senior citizens, veterans, and children. Generally, people who don't have filing requirements. As Leslie was explaining, if the fraudster files first, I think, or engages in the fraud first, I guess, with the 1095 issue, and they're not aware of it, it can prevent them from being able to file. So if you're proactive, and you file, then it can help prevent some of the issues, or at least minimize the damage and make it easier to unwind. Next slide, please. I'll get more into detail about that. Yes?
Evan, yeah, can you talk a little bit about the importance, like we talked about this, of filing a $0 return, maybe if you're, in one of those vulnerable populations?
Perfect. So that was going to be my first bullet point here on senior citizens.
Oh, sorry.
The great minds think alike. Thank you, Leslie. So, senior citizens, where the tax counseling for the elderly, the VITA program are completely free. And so one of the things I recommend to my clients is to make an appointment every filing season and use that free service to have an added layer of protection against identity theft, and file a $0 return with the VITA sites for free. It's very low cost for a really big benefit, especially considering the time to unwind identity theft is averaging about 22 months. And now with the recent government shutdown, that time will likely be even longer. So, and then with the tax filing season, there's just a lot of layers that complicate resolving it, and it's already taking a really long time. And this is especially important, and I'll let Leslie touch on this in terms of how it can affect your benefits identity theft, but um, I think she had a really great case about Social Security benefits being affected. I've seen it where uh, the being reported as having a gainful employment status has resulted in a taxpayer's uh, housing vouchers being revoked, and they're trying to get help with keeping their housing, and we're having to explain to them we can help you unwind the identity theft, but unfortunately, it's going to take about 22 months, and hoping that the other party will be amenable to uh, reinstating that housing voucher with just the packet that we're going to submit of the 14039, the FTC report, the police report, and other supporting documentation. But it puts the victim of the identity theft in a very vulnerable position. And so that's why I say, the cost of just scheduling like a 30, 40-minute appointment with the VitaSite to get a free tax prep to file a $0 return can really help save you a lot of headaches and pain down the line. And if Leslie would like to talk about her case, I think with the Social Security benefits.
Yeah, sure. So what we're seeing are folks who are on Social Security disability, and if they work, right, one or two things could happen. If they have earnings, that could increase their Social Security disability benefits. So they'll get an annual letter. And we've had someone come in and say, oh, look, I got this letter, but I haven't worked. And then it's because someone else worked using their Social Security. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get Social Security to not make that increase. And then what they're going to do is later come back and collect those overpayments in ways that aren't very generous to the taxpayers. So that's unfortunate. And then
Leslie,
right, and then
go ahead.
Go ahead, Angela.
I was going to say, I've actually had several clients that have had this happen, and we've ended up, we weren't even really able to fix it with Social Security until the end of the year. Like, we weren't able to amend it, and it was really affecting the senior's pay. And she ended up getting half of what she was getting in her benefits, and it really made it difficult for her, and she was having a really hard time even paying her mortgage or taking care of herself because they were taking so much out of her Social Security that she was no longer receiving. So this really can have like serious consequences for the clients.
Yeah, thanks for that. And another thing we see, when you're receiving Social Security disability, you're limited in how much you can make, right? Before your Social Security goes away or gets adjusted, right? And so that's another possibility, is someone could be totally, they could get a notice saying you earn too much money. Now, for better or worse, it usually takes years before that gets caught up with, and then they'll say, we've audited your earnings and you earn too much money. And so now you owe us all this money back and you're not going to get Social Security disability anymore. So those are the two things that we're seeing happening most often.
Yes. So, I mean, given the gravity of the suffering that this fraud can cause for our clients, for people we're providing consults on, whenever we're doing outreach or education, I think it's really important to let them know that, free programs like the VITA program, with reputable IRS certified preparers are available. Very low cost in terms of just 30, 40 minutes is really easy to prepare a $0 return. Can help give you a lot of extra protection against any type of identity theft, because it would help the service flag it faster. If they got two returns, they'd flag it immediately, not process anything until it was until they identified the true owner of the social or the ITIN, and then process the correct return and rejected the other as fraud. So another vulnerable population is children, and especially schools for the last decade or so have been targeted And one really disturbing example was the Velasco Independent School District in Texas, where 16,000 students' personal identifiable information was leaked, including name, date of birth, social security number, race, as well as immigration status, homeless status, and even flagged if they were potentially dyslexic. So this was extremely harmful to those children, and can cause harm for the rest of their lives, having all of their information out there and making sure that we're advising them on how to protect themselves, getting those fraud alerts. And another really important side note in terms of children, I think a lot of people have not really given it much thought, but a lot of articles that I've read regarding this topic, one of the other ways that these fraudsters are able to get information is given how all of us now are on social media and proud when we have grandchildren or when we have kids. A lot of people will post on there, oh, my baby was born, and give the full legal name, where they were born. Um, if the parents still have their full legal name on their Facebook or whatever account it is, especially the mom, if the mom has her maiden name on there. I know that I told my mom, I was like, you take your maiden name off off your Facebook account. I was like, because that's one of the common security questions. Um, and if you also have the city where you're born, and it just really makes it easy for these fraudsters to collect all the information they need to either perpetrate fraud, and they don't have to worry about the date of birth because they're starting to create synthetic identities where they don't have to use all the information from just one individual, but they use a combination of information, real information and fake information to create synthetic identities. So if your child was born this year and is not even one yet, they can use that social and maybe the name to create a synthetic identity for somebody who's 18 or older that can have a job or earnings and has to file a return. So really important to be careful with what information you're putting out on social media as well. And another vulnerable population, if you're located in California, John Burton Advocates for Youth. They're a great organization. I work with them and collaborate with them for the last few years to help homeless and transitioning foster youth. There are two laws that Congress enacted to protect foster youth, and they require states to conduct annual credit checks for children aged 14 and up, and also to teach those children how to interpret their credit reports, identify inaccuracies, and correct them with the credit bureaus. So unfortunately, foster youth are at a higher risk because their information is shared with a lot of adults, and not all of them are as trustworthy as they should be. And so their information is leaked or misused. And by the time they transition into adulthood, they could find themselves in a lot of trouble, debt on non-tax related identity theft and tax related identity theft. Another issue that really comes up frequently is where they've already transitioned out of foster care. They're 18 and the state is no longer required to conduct annual credit reports. And these young adults find themselves in survival mode. And I like to quote Nina Olson, how she says, being poor is a full-time job. Can you just imagine, transitioning out of foster care and being expected, in your late teens, early 20s to just fully support yourself? Cost of living is so insane. And so triaging all of the other things that you're having to all your other immediate needs to stop and try to think, oh, I need to also check my credit reports. It can be really hard to manage all of that. So whenever you're working with foster youth or you come into contact with foster youth, it's really important to remind them that they are at higher risk and to empower them on how to take steps to protect themselves. Next slide, please. So we are getting close to the time, so I will go through this one pretty quick. And in response to the increase in identity theft, the IRS has taken a more proactive approach, and we've been seeing a lot more of these IRS letters requesting proof of identity, which is a great thing. Unfortunately, as Heather had mentioned, low-income clients are more transient than others. who have more stable income or earning potential. And so it can be really hard for them to authenticate themselves with ID Me, follow the procedures necessary. So one of the things I usually do is schedule an appointment at a taxpayer assistance center, go with the client to help confirm their identity. That's going to be a lot harder, this upcoming year with the reductions in staff and the reductions in times that these taxpayer assistance centers are going to be open. So you're going to have to plan in advance and be aware of what hours of operation is going to be available at your local taxpayer assistance center if you need to tap into this resource. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start off with the technology risks. One, I think, is just, the importance of attorney's duty to supervise, making sure that that our staff and volunteers understand that they cannot connect to open Wi-Fi networks. It comes up pretty much every semester with law clerks, where they're like, I'll check in with them, how things are going. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to, I'll be working on this tomorrow. I'll be at Starbucks or I'll be at Panera, whatever the Wi-Fi network is. I was like, no, you're not. I was like, that's an open Wi-Fi network. You can't do that unless you're going to use your hotspot for your phone, or if you'd like, you can check out a hotspot that we have here for the organization, but you should not be connecting to Wi-Fi. And this is standard training that I provide to every single volunteer who works with us when we first onboard them, but it never seems to surprise me that they forget. And so you just have to constantly remind them. The other thing that's important to consider is new tools such as wearables like smartwatches. Uh, they are small and have very low power, so they often lack the strong security tools like firewalls, virus scans, and full data protection. And these devices are almost always connected to Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, or mobile data. And each connection creates a new door that attackers may try to enter. So making sure that if you do have any staff members or any volunteers that are working with you, that they check their settings, that they make sure that those wearables have a very small limit of window before they close and lock down, that they don't download Outlook app, and just take steps to minimize those weaker security connections. In terms of the major data breaches that we've seen strike both government and private groups, causing wide harm and to people and systems, I think this is going to be something that we're going to see a lot more of next year, with people having their information compromised. I think it's going to be important to flag in educational presentations that if they were, AT&T had a huge one, data breach, making sure that individuals know what steps to take on filing an FTC report, or a police report, getting credit alerts set or fraud alerts set on their credit. And you can do this for 1 year up to 7 years for free if you are a victim of identity theft. Otherwise, there would be an annual fee. So little things like that. There's a lot of great resources out there, which Leslie will get into more once we get to the resource slides. Next slide, please. And I'll hand it over to Leslie.
Thanks, Evan. Right, so this is sort of a summary of what you can do. So first, notice the signs of ID theft. And that includes if you get a letter from the IRS inquiring about a suspicious tax return that you didn't file. You can't e-file your tax return because of a duplicate social security number. That's not always ID theft, but it could be. That could also just be another parent filing with the children, right? So yeah, but if it's your social security number, then it's most likely ID theft. You get an IRS notice that an online account is being created in your name and you didn't create it. You get an IRS notice that you owe additional tax or refund offset, or that there are collection actions against you for a year you didn't file a tax return. IRS records could indicate you received wages or other income from an employer you didn't work for. And we talked about, the importance of being able to get wage and income statements. Finally, and as Evan pointed out, this doesn't have to be a business, that self-employed individuals often get EIN numbers, but if you've been assigned an EIN number, employer ID number, but you didn't request it, possibly someone else used your information to get that. Next slide. So what happens when the IRS finds identity theft? They find that there was identity theft. They will remove any fraudulent returns or earnings. They'll place an identity theft indicator on the account for any year that identity theft is detected, and they automatically issue that taxpayer IP PIN, which is, of course, good and bad all in the same. So, and Heather covered that so nicely, some of the struggles that our clients have with using the IP PIN. Next. These are some resources, and I believe that we are going to make these slides available, so these will be on there. Form 14039, the identity theft affidavit, identitytheft.gov, that files the FTC report and generates the form 14039. And the 14039 can also be submitted directly to the IRS examiner as part of an initial exam or a request for an audit reconsideration. If the ID theft prevents e-filing, form 14039 should be mailed with the paper return. And if the taxpayer receives notice of deficiency, they can and should petition the tax court, and the form 14039 can be provided to counsel or appeals. And then next. Oh, okay. So here are some ID theft resources that you can use, online resources. You can create an IRS online account and monitor your records for free. You can request tax records, wage and income transcripts. We've talked about that quite a bit. You can do a credit freeze and fraud alerts by visiting the consumerftc.gov. And then there's also a resource for how to protect your child from identity theft and where to visit to do that. And I think that's the last slide, other than our contact information.
There's one more with identitytheft.gov and the FTC report and free credit check information.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Yes, and free credit check information is, of course, very, very important. We use it a lot for our clients in other consumer law matters, but that's very helpful. Once you know that identity theft has occurred, folks should get their credit reports right away.
And that is the last slide. Unfortunately, we are about to run out of time. We might be able to get to one question. If one that's the first one that was on here is that hasn't been covered is, has anybody been able to prove ACA ID theft when the taxpayer knows they had marketplace coverage in the previous year, but told the broker they did not want or need insurance from that year, but they still get a 1095?
I have not, Polly. I haven't had that scenario.
Okay, and we'll do one more since we're right at 2 o'clock. This one's a quick one. Do you wait the entire 22 plus months, or do you go to task before that when you're doing an ID theft claim? I know we usually go to task about a year out.
I would say it depends on the.
I don't know what Taz could do about the ID theft affidavit and that process, but they certainly could help with collections or other matters that have been caused as a result of the ID theft. So if I can't handle that myself, if I can't get collections to, agree to put a hold on, then I might go to Taz for help with something like that.
Yeah, we usually do it if we're having problems where, because sometimes when there's ID theft, we've had issues where they won't talk to you because of the ID theft and there's notations on the account and you can't get anything done. So we have contacted TAS and received help through those type of processes. But yeah, there's really not much they can do on the actual ID theft.
Yeah.
So
My answer is same as Leslie and Angela's. If depending on the facts and circumstances, like if there's something that I can't do, like try to push pause on collection action, then I would reach out. Otherwise, then just let it play out.
So, all right, I think that's all the time we have today. Again, our contact info is on this slide. If you do have any questions or think of a question later, feel free to reach out. We are all available and happy to answer. So thank you all very much for your time, and we'll see you at the next chat.